Hey everyone, how's it going? Before we get things started, I just want to say, first of all, thank you for being so patient with me for getting this one out. You know, with all the technical problems and all that kind of stuff, you know, it means a lot that you guys waited so patiently for this, and also that I hope I can meet your expectations. So, with that out of the way, I also want to say that, you know how in a lot of other videos that I have this little border right here? For some reason, whenever I try using the border on this project, it will just crash my editing software. I'm not sure why it's been doing that. I'm going to look into it to see, you know, if I can get that fixed. So that way, when the next video comes around, you won't have so much negative space to look at. So I do apologize for that. But with that said, previously on Ryrule. And now for the conclusion. I guess because, you know, I thought this would be a good idea at one point. I have a lot of regrets. The PlayStation was a crucial console to own if you were a fan of JRPGs. I've said it before, this console was known for popping out classic JRPGs every minute, to the mainstream hits like Final Fantasy VII, to the cult classics like Legend of Dragoon, and even some diamonds in the rough like Wild Arms or Alundra. The PlayStation was a goldmine, there's no arguing against it. Naturally, when there are so many great games on one console, you're going to have several that fly underneath the radar. That's where today's game in question comes in. I first discovered this game around 2015, and at the time, I found it fascinating. This wasn't the first RPG on the original PlayStation, but this was the first JRPG to be localized and brought over to the West. Plus, Camelot Software Planning were the ones behind this game, previously acclaimed for their Shining series over with Sega, and then 6 years later with the Golden Sun games on Nintendo. You know, I forgot, they also made some, Mario sports games, like, they've made a lot of Mario sports games. Maybe just a little too many Mario sports games, but that's besides the point. At the time I found out about this game, I was going on a massive Golden Sun binge, so seeing how this game was made by the people who have made some of my favorite RPGs filled me with a lot of excitement. However, when I went to dig up some information on this game, my efforts bore little fruit. The only consistent things I was able to find was that the game was panned pretty hard due to the random encounter rate, and that the game was just too challenging for a lot of people. You would think that with the internet being ever so prevalent in our daily routine and how we can find almost anything and everything with it, that I'd be able to find more than just, the game is bad because it's hard. But I mean, I can't even find much in terms of official artwork. I can find screenshots, no problem, but high quality artwork, character portraits, none of that. There really isn't a lot of information on this game. It almost feels as if Sony and Camelot are trying to keep this one under the rug. Which only has me more curious about the game. Why would they want to keep something like this hidden? Because it sucks! Bye! Okay, but in all seriousness, I doubt the game could be that bad, right? I mean, Earthbound wasn't received all that great when it first came out, but that has one of the most passionate fandoms out there. So, maybe I really did find a diamond in the rough here, who knows? There's only one way to find out now, isn't there? This is a little game called Beyond the Beyond. So, in case if you couldn't tell by the way how I phrased things earlier, this is actually my first time going through Beyond Beyond. Initially, I had an idea of what kind of game I was getting into, seeing how a number of Camelot games share some mechanics, looks, and even game feel. After the title screen, we're introduced to a young girl holding a dragon pleading for help. A nice callback to Shining Force. This dragon is actually the mouthpiece for our silent protagonist, Finn, a young swordsman in training. This game starts in a fairly standard fashion. You have a young boy in training, a young love interest who thinks that the boy is being pushed too hard. The young girl eventually gets into trouble, and then we gotta go save her. It's pretty standard. Though I do have to say something since we're just now starting the game, these controls are just a bit off. Maybe it's because I'm playing a PS1 game on the PS3, but it feels as if there's a half second's worth of input delay. Navigating through menus is fine, but moving around just feels awkward. Movement feels grid-based, almost like as if it's something out of RPG Maker, and I really feel that in the areas that require precise movement. Speaking of which, this game even looks like an RPG Maker game. It doesn't look bad per se, it's got a good color palette, has a nice pop to it, but there's nothing here that blows me away. You look at some of the SNES RPGs like Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy III, or Final Fantasy VI, whatever you want to call it, they were able to pull off some impressive stuff there, but here on the PlayStation, a 32-bit console, they don't really do much to show off this game's graphical power. Now, in fairness, this is an early PlayStation game, so I guess I can't be too hard on it, right? I mean, even still, towards some of the later parts of the game, they were able to pull off some pretty cool 3D effects. It's still just a bummer when you look at the games on the Super Nintendo and on the Sega Genesis, consoles that were significantly less powerful than the PlayStation. They still had games that were much more visually appealing. I'll give credit where it's due, however. The character portraits aren't that bad at all. If anything, considering how this is all sprite-based, it's pretty impressive, but I'm not sure why the portraits are extreme close-ups of their faces. You look at the character portraits in something like Shining Force, and it's an even profile. You have an idea of what the character design is supposed to look like, and it looks nice, it looks clean, but here, yeah, the faces are detailed, but it kind of makes me uncomfortable. Something about these faces just seems stiff and lifeless, as if they're dolls or something. I don't know, it's just these faces are really unsettling. So, yeah, the girl needs rescue and then we have to go after her. This leads us to the first cave, and it does a pretty decent job of demonstrating the battle mechanics and showing us what the game has in store for the future. So, first things first, we got the battles. Beyond the Beyond is a turn-based RPG with random encounters. For the most part, it is what you would expect. You select an action, then you watch it play out. Again, pretty standard stuff, right? But this game actually brings something new to the table. If you look at the top bar, you're going to see VP and LP. VP is your health. Once when you run out of health, you'll be set in a groggy state and then you'll lose out on a turn. Once when you come back, some of your LP will be transferred to your VP. So in some ways, the LP system is sort of like emergency rations or backup health. And then once when you run out of VP and LP, then you're dead. There's a part of me that wants to say that I like this system. It means that you have to think carefully on when you use healing magic or healing items, so it does add a bit of strategy there. But more often than not, this comes off as a hindrance. I've heard horror stories from people who were neck deep in a dungeon crawling session, they came across an unfair random encounter, and they were pretty much set into a deathlock. It also feels as if the stats that you gain from leveling up are intentionally low to give the VP and LP system more of a purpose. I never really felt as if I was dealing a lot of damage, but the enemies were hitting me like trucks. It comes off as artificial difficulty, not genuine. I'm not sure. I never felt as if I was growing more powerful, despite how many times I leveled up and despite how far into the game that I got. But that's not all that there is to the battle system, however. I actually learned this tidbit from who also made a video on Beyond the Beyond that you should totally check out. By mashing the X button while in battle, it also makes it more likely that you'll land a critical hit. When I first heard about this, I thought it was like when you hold A and B when you're trying to catch a Pokemon. It's something that you think is a mechanic, but it really isn't. Well, I've tried it, and I did notice that I landed a lot more criticals than I did before. On top of this, it also increases your chances of attacking twice, blocking enemy attacks, and even counter-attacking. I will say, landing critical hits does feel very satisfying. Like when you activated a critical, the character will just blaze off towards the enemy, leaving a trail of fire behind them. I love this kind of over-the-top stuff. And then when you landed twice in a row, it just, that feels really good. And you know something good's about to happen when you hear a little click. Again, maybe it's just a mental thing like in Pokemon, but I swear, mashing the X button also increases your chances of a successful retreat. The issue is that the game doesn't really explain any of this to you. It's something that you find out either through experimentation or through word of mouth. I know I said earlier that this game looks like something out of RPG Maker, but the battles themselves look pretty good. You got excellent sprite work and animation, the magic attacks are pretty impressive, and they all sound nice and crisp. The way how battles are presented is very clean, and they look especially good when being played in HD. I also like how in the battles the camera will move around and snap to certain angles. I know some don't like it, but for me it just made it feel more dynamic and fast-paced. So yeah, I'll give credit where credit's due. The first quote-unquote dungeon does a good job of showing you how the mechanics work. And again, this first area paints a good picture of what to expect in the future. That being, that the game sucks. When you're in this cave, you don't have a party, but that doesn't stop enemies from gaining up on you with an unfair advantage. You think fighting 4v1 is fair? No, it's bullshit. And here's a spoiler. This isn't going to be the last time that you're plopped into a dungeon left to fend for yourself. And the random encounter rate for a first level is unbearable, and the worst part is that it doesn't lighten up anytime soon. So we're dragging our feet through the mud, and we eventually do find Annie, the girl, and oh, no. I've been on the internet long enough to know where this is going, and I'm not gonna, whoa! Did she just get dragged down to a pit of lava by a giant tentacle monster? What's this game rated again? Huh. Oh, thank God it's fatter out. Oh. Annie? Is she going to be alright? Annie? Are you okay? Are you okay? Oh, yeah, she's fine. That's good. That's good. So Annie is the first to join Finn, and I've got to say, she's pretty great. She's the white mage of the group, and that always gets a plus in my book, but she also hits a lot harder than you'd think, and her magic attacks are actually pretty powerful. Character-wise, I mean, she's fine. I never found her obnoxious. I like the part in the beginning how she's trying to hype herself up, and then she falls flat on her face. I'm not sure why, I always found that funny. But in terms of her practicality in the party, she was easily the most useful and the most reliable thanks to her healing magic and her weirdly good offense. Some other members that join your party are pretty colorful as well. You have Taunt, who was once a human but then was transformed into this cute little yellow blob. He's the summoner of the party, so whenever I was in a tight pinch, I know I could rely on his summons to get us out of a tough spot. Edward is an interesting one. He's about the same age as Finn, and he's a prince who was chased out of his kingdom by a rival nation. He's the black mage, so you can expect some powerful elemental magic from this kid. It's a minor detail, but I like how in battles the party will look at each other, almost like as if they're planning the next move. Speaking of which, the default selection is that your party members will think and act independently. So you'll select what Finn wants to do, and then everyone else will do their own thing. And honestly, it works fine. They seem to know when to heal and when to use items, so I can't say that I had that much of an issue with it. Even still, you're better off having this option set to manual. It's better when you're in complete control. Now, with all of that being said, there is a certain party member who I've neglected to talk about. Someone who drove me up the wall with this unending bullshit. And that, my friends, is the cursed soldier known as Samson. You meet him very early in the game, and when he joins your party, you get to see how ridiculously powerful he is. And then some clown throws a cursed towel on him, and then he's nerfed for like half the game. So basically, he has the curse ailment, and for those of you who haven't played a Camelot game, it means that randomly, Samson won't be able to attack, or even when he does, he'll just take a lot of damage afterwards. He was so useless. And sure, there are elements in the story that I thought were pretty interesting thanks to his curse, but this works better as a plot point, not a game mechanic. You have to deal with Samson being unreliable for 20 hours, and that's half of the game. It's a cool idea on paper, but it does not translate well at all. Again, that might be the point, but it's stupid. Which brings me to problem number 1. But before I get into that, I'm going to ask you guys a question. What is the most important part of any RPG? Is it the story, the characters, the setting, the lore, battle mechanics, character progression? These are all acceptable answers, but for my money, the most crucial thing that can make or break your game is a little thing called pacing. You can have the most in-depth character progression system, you can have the most intense battle mechanics, you can have a gripping story in a world that you get lost in for hours with characters that feel like real people, but if I'm constantly playing a game of stop and go, if the battles are dragged out for an eternity, then your game has failed and your efforts are wasted. This game has always been infamous for its random encounters, and usually I'm okay with random encounters. Hell, some of my favorite games of all time have them, and they don't bother me in those games, but in here, it's every single step that you take. You have this huge world that I want to explore, but I can't do that because I'm always being halted. On a side note, this overworld fucking blows. You'd think that there would be like a trail or something that would nudge you in the right direction, but they want you to blindly stumble around, constantly stopping to deal with random encounters, and hoping to God that you've made it to the right place. Because if you didn't, and you're in a spot that you're not supposed to be in, you're going to die. And you're going to be sent to the church in the last town that you've been in, meaning that not only did you just lose half of your gold, but all of your progress. Well, gee, if only there was a world map that could tell me where to go. Oh, wait, there is one? That's right, there is! You get the world map on a boat that you come across 20 hours in! And if you don't pick it up in this one spot, then guess what? You miss out on the world map because you never get to this area ever again! Meaning that the world map is a permanently missable item! Are you out of your fucking mind? And even still, this is what it looks like! This! It doesn't tell you anything! Is this a joke? How do you fuck up something as simple as a world map? How? Now, while I'm still on the topic of bad pacing, because it's more than just the random encounters, it's also the way how things are spaced out. You see this guy on the box art? That's the main antagonist, and you don't see him until 20 hours in. You get to see his lackey in the beginning of the game, but this guy is on the front of the box. That's like playing Skyward Sword and not seeing Girahim until the Fire Temple. Without the presence of a single villain, it makes the story feel as if it's not worth following, which is why we're this long into the video and I haven't really talked about what happens in this game in terms of plot. I mean, really, it's a whole lot of nothing. The characters are jerked around left, right, and sideways as they try to find someone who could break Samson's curse. There's some generic evil darkness thing looming over that wants to take over the entire world, and they even have the nerve to bust out the Chosen One card. Yep, Finn is some chosen schmuck who's destined to save the world, and only he is able to do it. You learn this when Finn's father figure exposition dumps all over the place before he's sent to his execution, and they try really hard to make it dramatic and emotional. So, first of all, fuck you for doing this Chosen One bullshit. It's cliche, it's done to death, and here's a spoiler. They don't do anything with it. 2, fuck you for trying to have an emotional moment with a character who has absolutely no character. Kevin's, Finn's father figure, gets thrown into a fucking volcano and dies, and suddenly I'm supposed to feel sorry for Finn? After he's done absolutely nothing at all? Was I supposed to feel bad that Kevin's died? Because I didn't! I didn't care because the game doesn't give me a reason to care. You know, before I go on a diatribe about how nothing that the story is, because honestly, it's not worth it. I'm going to bring it back to the bad pacing because I think this next tidbit, this next note that I have is just great. And I don't really know how to segue into it, so I'm just going to come out and say it. You don't fight the first boss until 12 hours in. You know, we're going to talk about the process of getting to said boss in just a moment. I just wanted to bring this up so I could put all of this into perspective. You don't fight the first boss until 12 hours in. You don't see the main antagonist until 20 hours in. You don't break Samson's curse until 20 hours in, you know, and that's when he becomes useful to the party. And you don't get something as simple as a world map until 22 hours in. And even then, it's a permanently missable item. So what do you do in the first hour? What is this game's hook? Well, in the first hour, you got a slide puzzle. Fucking great. Fuck me. And as you would expect, the bad pacing bleeds its way inside the dungeons as well. So not only do you have to struggle with the obnoxious random encounters, you have to deal with some of the worst structured dungeons I've ever had to deal with. And this one pyramid dungeon is the pits. You have to trek down several floors of this area while having to press buttons and move platforms around, right? It sounds simple. Sounds easy to do. Well, you throw in the random encounters into the mix, and then you make every room look the same, and you're gonna find that you're lost in no time. It may not sound that bad, but you really need to play for yourself to know what I mean. It takes something that should take maybe about 20 to 30 minutes to over an hour, and it's all thanks to these stupid random encounters. And with a handful of exceptions, they only get worse. Later on, you're going to find yourself in this one dungeon where you have to lead this head onto a specific platform in order to progress. And the only thing is that 1, you can't see what's in front of you, 2, there are pits you can fall in, causing you to restart the puzzle, and 3, of course, the random encounters. This is an area that you have to be precise with your movements, and like I said in the beginning of the video, it feels like as if there's some input delay. So, needless to say, I was stuck in this area for a good while. And the best part? The first boss is at the end of this dungeon, so if you die to the boss, you have to go through the entire thing all over again. Not all the dungeons end with the boss, which threw me off at first, but then I remembered that Golden Sun was similar in that regard. But in that game, you would have a good idea of when you're going to be fighting a boss. There's proper build-up for most of these guys, but in Beyond and Beyond, not so much. Some of them have them, some of them don't. Sometimes you have to fight a boss while you're progressing through the story, and other times you don't. It's inconsistent. This first boss, though, oh my god, this guy was a war of attrition. There came a point where he ran out of magic, so he was just using the normal attacks. Towards the end of the fight, I was running low on healing items. The thought of me dying and having to redo the entire dungeon and boss fight just made my stomach turn, but thankfully, I was able to take him down on my first try. But you know what? I'm not gonna lie. Aside from that one boss, most of the bosses here are pretty great. It kind of felt like as if I was fighting the bosses in Golden Sun, where I was in complete control and I had both hands on the wheel. I knew what I was doing, and it felt great taking down some of these guys. And you want to know something else? Some of these dungeons have really cool ideas. There's this one point in the game where you have to backtrack to the pyramid dungeon I was talking about earlier to plant a beanstalk. Then you have to climb the giant beanstalk to reach a tower that's floating in the sky. The tower is so high up that on one side it'll be daytime, and on the other side it'll be night. Honestly, this is a really cool idea. I can't say that I've played many games where I have to climb a giant beanstalk to reach an ancient tower, and aesthetically, it's pretty nice. I'm not gonna lie. There's a cool idea here, and the way how you make it through this dungeon is really cool. But guess what kills it? It's the random encounters in that every room looks the same. Later on in the game, you're going to find yourself in this one dungeon where you have to shrink yourself by touching these green mushrooms, and the whole thing feels like something right out of Minish Cap, and it would be pretty good. I like how when you're shrunken down and you come across an enemy, your sprites will be really tiny. Thankfully, the size difference doesn't mess with your stats, so at least they were merciful on that front. I really would enjoy this dungeon, but again, these random encounters just kill any and all enjoyment that I would have had. There's this other dungeon. It's the one that I alluded to earlier on in the video, where you're dumped into this place all by yourself. You have to find your way to a specific chest by navigating through these invisible paths. This place made me nervous, especially after talking to the townsfolk who said that, this place was going to be incredibly difficult. They were hyping up this place to be this near impossible dungeon, and that only the best of the best can make it through. But here's the best part. This place is easier than the first cave in the beginning of the game. I mean, yeah, the enemies that you bump into here are much more powerful, and I did have a heart attack at this one moment, but the random encounter rate here it's so low, and while I was on the top floor, I didn't have any random encounters whatsoever. And even then, it's so short, and it just kind of ends after a while. The reward for clearing this dungeon is that you get to unlock a new class. You have to start at level 1, but the stats only go up from this point. You can wield more powerful weapons. So, in some ways, it kind of reminds me of changing a class in Fire Emblem, for example. At this point, other members of your party can unlock their potential, provided that they're at a high enough level. But it's not just the members in your party, but even the dragon that follows Finn around. His name is Steiner, by the way. He becomes this beast who can fly over mountains, and yeah, this is like your airship at this point. You get to ride around the world on a dragon. When I found this out, man, my jaw hit the floor. Man, this is so freaking cool. You can fly around the world riding a giant dragon, and there are no random encounters. Thank the Lord! I mean, you can't land in forests or in mountains, which is needlessly restricting, but who gives a shit, man? I'm riding a freaking dragon, and you're not. And look, I know I sound really positive right now, and as cool as this moment was, it didn't undo all the bullshit that I had to deal with to get to this point. Just the whole game, it reeks of incompetence. The way how events are spaced out, the way how areas are designed, the dungeon structure, the random encounters, these are all elements that make up the poor pacing. The next two problems that I have kind of go hand in hand with each other, so bear with me on this one. But have you ever played a game called Dragon Quest? Not the good ones, I'm talking about the original, or as we here in the West like to call it, Dragon Warrior. It was the first of its kind, don't get me wrong, but this game has aged like milk and cheese. Well, Beyond the Beyond decided to copy some notes from that game, so you can expect that kind of inventory management. You got reviving fallen party members at churches, and of course, every single time they get a new party member, they start at level 1. Except for like the last two, but most of the party members that you get start at level 1, and that's incredibly frustrating because that means you have to grind in order to keep them up to speed. So, if you ever play Dragon Quest, then you'll have an idea of what to expect from this game. So this is going to be incredibly subjective, so if you're going to disagree with me, trust me, I get it, I completely get where you're coming from, but I'm not sure why they would want to model their game after Dragon Quest when, at this point, there were a number of RPGs on the market that took what worked in that game and refined it. Like, you look at the original Final Fantasy, that game has aged, yeah, but it holds up a lot better than you'd think. I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me that they would use something that, at the time, was starting to show its age, when they could have pulled for something that was more refined and realized. Maybe it has something to do with Dragon Quest being weirdly popular in Japan, but I don't know, my 2 cents, I'd rather play a Final Fantasy than a Dragon Quest. Modern Dragon Quest games are great, I'm not saying nothing about that, but the original, not so much. That's my point. Now, just to clarify, I'm not saying that this game is bad because it pulls from Dragon Quest, but you look at something like Shining Force, for example. You know, that game pulled some things from Dragon Quest, but here's the thing. When that game came out, not only was that style of game completely different, well, with Shining Force being a tactics game, but again, at the time, there wasn't that much to draw from. Beyond the Beyond was on the PS1, so they could have pulled from Final Fantasy, or Phantasy Star, or Chrono Trigger, but instead, they pulled from something that was, again, starting to show its age. Which leads me to my last problem. Have you ever played a game called Earthbound? Like Beyond the Beyond, that game also pulls a lot of inspiration from Dragon Quest. Now, admittedly, I've never really been much of a fan of Earthbound, but I can respect it because its writing is solid and the setting was unique for its time. And even still, that game did away with the random encounters and the music was unlike anything I've ever heard of from a typical JRPG. Earthbound isn't a typical run-of-the-mill cookie-cutter RPG. It has an identity. Beyond the Beyond doesn't have anything like that to fall back on. It doesn't have an interesting setting or an interesting premise, and it doesn't try to do anything to innovate from the status quo. This game just exists between the realms of mediocrity and garbage. Now, that's not to say that there's absolutely nothing memorable about this game. I remember there was this one town that was disguised as a port, but at night when the tide was low, everyone would go to the shore and have a big party. I really liked that town. There are blips on the radar, but it's not enough to salvage the entire game. Honestly, I'm not sure what else I could say about this game. I'm not a negative kind of guy. I don't play games ready to hate on it because, you know, when I play a game, I want to have some sort of valued experience from it. Even with some of the worst games of all time, there's something that I can take away that's positive from it. But with this game, there isn't much to it. At best, it's mediocre, and at worst, it's easily one of the worst games that I've ever played. And you know what I do with these kind of games? I play them, I say to myself, this isn't very good. I put down the controller and I play something that's more worth my time. At the end of the day, there really isn't a reason for anyone to play this game. I'm not going to stop anyone from doing so. I mean, maybe there's something here for you that you'll enjoy. Who knows? And I know that there are those who like this game, and some of them were waiting for me to cover it. And I'm not trying to take away anything from those who liked this game, and I'm not about to call those people delusional for liking it either. You know, every game has value to someone, but for me, it doesn't have any. Again, if you think this game looks interesting, then go right ahead and check it out, but I firmly believe that you're better off spending your time with something better. But if there's something to take away from this game, it's that Camelot made 2 incredible games sometime after, so at least there's that. Life is way too short to be going out of your way to be miserable, and that's what this game made me feel. Honest to God, like, now that I'm sitting down and I'm really thinking about it, this might be the worst game that I've ever played. You know, with something like Big Rigs or Superman 64 or Sonic 06, you can get some sort of enjoyment out of them because they can be so bad that it's good. You know, you can get a laugh out of it. And with Sonic 06, that has a really good soundtrack to fall back on as well. But with Beyond the Beyond, there's nothing funny about this game. There's not anything here for me to enjoy, so I'm not wasting my time on this game anymore. It's weird to take in that Camelot made some of my favorite RPGs. Shining Force was my first RPG that I've ever played, so they made some of the most important games of my life. You know, to see them make a game that was this bad, it's a real eye-opener. Say what you will about Golden Sun Dark Dawn. You know, that game has problems up the rear, but it's nowhere near as bad as Beyond the Beyond. It doesn't even compare. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I really don't like doing these kind of negative videos. I know for some, the scripts just write themselves, but with something like this, I had to really force myself to work on this one. You know, and even bear in mind, like, with all the technical problems that I had before with, like, the capture card and everything like that, you know, I still had to play the game. I still had to write the script. I still had to do the voiceover, and I still had to edit the video, right? And I had to, like, really force myself to do all of this. It wasn't easy to make because it was not something that I really wanted to do. There's not a lot of fun covering a game that you don't like. So next time, I'm gonna switch things up a bit. I'm not gonna talk about games that I like. No. I'm gonna talk about games that I love. So until then, I'll see you around.
One, two, three, four.